of Warcraft, Rise of the Horde by Christy Golding. Chapter 20. I've spoken to many who were there at the destruction of the city of Shathra. When I ask them about the event, their minds are clouded, and their recall is poor. Even Drekthar, who remembers so much with astounding clarity, stammers and hesitates. When asked to recall the details, it is as though with demonic blood fresh in their mouths, those who drank can remember only the fury they felt, and not what they did in its grasps. Even those who did not drink that small handful which Drekthar is a member, even they cannot summon the details to mind. It is as if such an atrocity was so horrific that it wants to be forgotten. That some Draenei survived the assault is not in doubt. I've seen the sad, pathetic things that were once the glorious Draenei with my own eyes, wandering forlornly here in Azeroth, soft and shattered, crying for home. These lost ones are to be pitied. So it is that this account is vague, and I regret it. Such a moment, dark though it may be, should not be forgotten or glossed over. But such is the chronicler's challenge. The orcs charged down the trail, burning with a feral need to destroy. Some were so overflowing with rage and hatred that they took swipes at the very rocks as they passed them. Some bellowed their fury, others were grimly, deathly silent, all their energies contained and simmering, ready to be released at the proper moment. During that long run, Durtan was more afraid of his own people, of individuals that he had once called friend, than of any ogre wielding a club, or any herd of Talbuks, or any enraged, attacking Draenei. He was cold with sweat, shaking in his boots, but not from any fear for himself. His fear was for what would happen next. Not to the Draenei, for their destiny was surely already written, but to the orcs. He could not bring himself in those moments, as they were running to Shathra, to call them the Horde. At one point, a horrible rumbling knocked them all off their feet. As they clambered upright, they turned and looked back where they had come. It looked as if the mountain had exploded. Liquid fire was belching into the night sky, hurtling upwards, then falling and spattering down the jagged peak. It radiated and glowed like the demon blood that the orcs had just drunk, though its hue was orange-yellow and not an eerie green. More and more molten stone was spewed from the mountain. It was a glorious, memorizing, and a horrific sight. The orcs took it as a sign, and a cheer erupted from their ranks. After a few moments of celebrating, at the very mountain, the throne of Kil'jaeden blessing their endeavor, they turned to continue their race towards the slaughter. A mile outside the city they slowed. An area had been cleared, and recently too, and for a moment the first orcs to arrive at the site simply stared in confusion. This is where they had been told to assemble. This is where their war engines were supposed to have been quartered. Then, with no warning, something materialized right in front of their eyes. The orcs drew back, hissing. Then, in the face of all sanity and logic, they started snarling at the huge being. It towered over them, 3 times taller than the tallest ogre, red from its cloven hooves to the tip of its lashing tail, from its jutting horns to its sharp black nails. Its size was nothing like they had ever seen, but its shape. Durtan stared at it, thinking that it looked like nothing so much as a gigantic crimson-skinned Draenei. Then sudden realization that the orcs had been plunged into a personal conflict that should never have concerned them crashed over him like a tidal wave. You have nothing to fear, and everything to celebrate. You who have sworn allegiance to me, it cried, its voice penetrating the very bone. I am Kil'jaeden, The beautiful one who has been with you since the beginning, and I am with you now as you head to the most glorious battle yet. Once the wicked Draenei plotted against you, hiding an entire city from your eyes, but you have destroyed that city and others and vanquished their temple. All that remains is the one final battle, and then the threat will be eliminated. The green stone that once hid the city of Telmor from you now hides their doom from them. Kelamin Sami, Sole Lama Ka. And the illusion was dispelled. Before them were dozens of catapults, battering rams, siege weapons of all varieties. Standing beside the engines of war were the ogres, still and silent, their stupid faces filled with determination. They bore weapons suited to their size, and Duratan realized that there were at least 36 of them ready to fight. They made the huge weapons look like toys. "This is war," Kil'jaeden said, and waved his hands. The warlocks all cried out and gasped. Grasped their heads for the moment, then blinked and grinned. "New spells have flooded your minds. Use them well. Take the Draenei now." As if he had opened a gate, the bloodthirsty orcs leaped into motion. Some of them made for the weapons by which the walled city would fall, pushing them forward with a strength which Duratan had never before seen them display. The ogres immediately went to the others, moving the enormous heavy weapons at a brisk pace. Other orcs were far too sunk in bloodlust and simply raced forward in the direction of the city. What they would do when they got there, Duratan did not know, but he and his clan followed dutifully. The war machines propelled by the orcs and the orcs by the ogres and the orcs rambled steadily on. Even before they were maneuvered into position, the walls that protected the city were under attack. Enormous green glowing rocks fell from the sky to slam into the city. Towers and citadels had risen above the wall level. The wall level cracked and shattered, and the wall itself was starting to crumble in several places. But it was not just boulders falling from the sky that comprised attacks. It was what rose from them once they had landed. Moving deliberately but with sickening speed, creatures that appeared made of the same green, glowing stone got to their feet and charged. They hammered at the wall, joined by more mundane stones hurled by the catapults, and huge tree trunks rammed into the great gate door. Two ogres were pounding on the door with their clubs, and the timber shuddered from within. Duratan could hear cries of fury and horror as the Draenei tried to battle the creatures, infernals, as he had heard one warlock refer to them. Most of the warlocks were using these new servants, but a few still had the smaller, more familiar creatures obeying their commands. The city could not last long under such an assault. With a mighty crash, an entire section of stone wall crumbled. The tide of crazed ones and bellowing ogres swarmed through the breaches thus created, shrieking and swinging weapons. Duratan remained where he was, rooted to the earth, watching as the orcs fought and killed and died. The rage and fury he had seen them display before in the thick of battle was nothing compared to what he saw now. There was no strategy, no attempt at defense, no calls for retreat when retreat was necessary. This was nothing more than murder and slaughter, dealing death and receiving it, stupidly rushing into dead ends where traps had been laid. Such was to be expected from the ogres, as they fell heavily, blood streaming from their bodies. Duratan did not mourn them, but the orcs, they were beyond caring about anything about the sensation of their beyond anything but the sensation of their own blood singing in their veins, and the battle cries poured from their throats. Dozens, no, hundreds would die this night. The casualties would render the city unlivable. Come sunrise, blue and green bodies would litter the streets. But for now it was carnage and chaos, and the very depths of insanity. Duratan swung his axe because it was fight or die, and even now, even though he knew his people were on the dark road, He did not wish death. Kil'jaeden and Manaroth stood together, watching the green meteors that housed Infernos crash into the earth. "They swarm like insects," grunted Manaroth. Kil'jaeden nodded, pleased. "Indeed. It is beautiful to watch. I am well pleased." "What's next?" Kil'jaeden turned eyes of mild surprise on his lieutenant. "Next? There is no next. Not at least here. The orcs have fulfilled their purpose. They burned with your blood, my friend. It will consume them eventually, unless they have an outlet for it. And that outlet is only to be found in slaughtering every last Draenei on the face of this world." He watched as fire joined the glowing green hue in the distance. "It is well that you are done here," Manaroth said. "Argument mutters that you're wasting your time, and our master wishes us elsewhere." Kil'jaeden sighed. "You speak the truth. Sargeras hungers, and he has been very patient with me. I do regret one thing, that I won't be watching as they gut Velen. Oh well, enough to know that it happened. Let us leave this place." He gestured, and both he and his lieutenant disappeared. "What do you mean he is not there?" Gul'dan shrieked. This could not be. "What I said," Blackhand growled. "We scoured the city. Velen is nowhere to be found." "Perhaps an over-eager grunt found him first and mutilated the body," Gul'dan said nervously. This was not good news. He had instructed Blackhand to find the corpse of the prophet Velen and bring the Draenei's head to the Gul'dan. It was to be a present to Kil'jaeden. "Possible, even likely," Blackhand said. "But from what you had told me, even if his body had been hacked to pieces, he could not have been mistaken for an ordinary Draenei." Gul'dan shook his head, feeling worried and slightly sick. The Draenei had blue skin and black hair. Velen, their prophet, had pale white skin and white hair, as long as a piece of his skin remained whole, he could be identified. "You scoured the city." Blackhand's brows drew together. "I told you we did," he said darkly, his breath starting to quicken and his eyes turning even redder as anger rose in him. Gul'dan nodded. Besotted though the orcs were by bloodlust, they would not have failed to search for the body most coveted by their leader. The reward would be too great. The anger, if it were overlooked and discovered later, too furious. Somehow Velen had escaped. That meant that there were probably other Draenei out there. In a sudden panic that made his heart race, he wondered just how many he had let slip through his fingers. And where in this wide, wide world they had gone. Once Velen had an entire temple filled with acolytes and priests and servants in which to meditate and pray. Now he was in a small room, one of only a handful who even had their own room. He held the violet crystal in his hand, and tears poured silent and unheeded down his face. He watched the fall of the city. He had wanted to stay to lend his own, not inconsiderable magic to the fray. But that path would have meant death, not merely his own, but that of his people. They did not need a marshal now. The orcs, their systems permeated with demon blood, burning with a lust for killing that would not be sated even if they slew every last Draenei on Draenor. Would never be sated until death stiffened their corpses. Kil'jaeden and Sargeras' burning legion of demonic forces owned them now. The orcs had numbers, ogres, warlocks, and a fury that would take them physically and emotionally to places where no rational mind would dare travel. There was nothing Velen could do but let the city fall, for there was nothing he could do that could possibly save it. Nor could the orcs be saved. The only flicker of hope for the eventual redemption of the Horde lay in the single clan who had not drunk the blood, had not made the pact, whose minds and hearts were still their own. Some 80 orcs, and that was all. 80 to stand against over a dozen other clans, most much larger than they, whose war chief was the worst of them all. The orcs would be treated as maddening beasts now. Whenever any Draenei chanced upon them, things to be put down quickly and mercifully, with the understanding that while the orcs did not fully know what they did, they must die regardless. Velen had wanted to abandon the city, to have it standing empty when the orcs descended, wanted to save as many Draenei lives as he could. But Lothair, the quick-speaking, intelligent general who succeeded Restylon after the latter's murder, had convinced him it would not work. If there had been an efficient number of Draenei to slaughter, Lothair said, his voice soft and compassionate, but yet hard as steel, then the lust that consumed them would not even be slated temporarily. They would still hunger to catch our scent while it was new and track us down. Those who flee would die. They must believe they had slain most of us in order for them to believe that it must be true. Velen had stared in horror. You would have me stand my people to knowing slaughter. All but a handful of us know what we flee. All but a handful of us know what we fled on Argus, said Lothair. We remember it. We remember what Kil'jaeden did, what happened to our people. We will happily die to preserve even a handful of our race uncorrupted. Velen had looked down then, his heart aching. If the orcs believed they had slain us except for a trivial handful, then Kil'jaeden would be satisfied. Velen had looked down then, his heart aching. If the orcs believe they had slain us, except for a trivial handful, then Kil'jaeden will be satisfied. He will depart. The orcs will suffer greatly, said Lothair, and did not look displeased. After what the orcs had done to the Draenei recently, Velen could not blame him. They will. And I have no doubt they will continue to track us down. But the methods they use to track a few dozen will be different than if they suspect there are a few hundred of us remaining, said Lothair. It is to our advantage to appear as scattered and helpless as possible. Velen had looked up at Lothair, haunted. It is easy for you to speak so, but the decision is not yours. It is mine. I must be the one to say, You and your family will come with me and live, but you will stay behind and let demon-crazed orcs tear you to pieces and anoint themselves with your blood. Lothair said nothing. There was nothing to say. Velen had spoken with each of his people he had chosen to send to die. He had embraced them and blessed them. He had taken items that meant something to them and promised to see that these things survived. He had watched as stoic and dried-eyed these walking dead had repaired their armor, sharpened their swords as if the outcome was actually in question. And he watched as they marched off, singing the ancient songs to enclose themselves behind a walled city and wait for mace or axe or spear to end their lives. Velen could not go with them. He had a unique ability, and if the Draenei were to survive, he needed to be as well. but he used the crystal to watch every moment of the battle, and the pain he felt was searing and yet purifying. Not one of these people would have died in vain. The orcs did not know about the Zengamarsh. They had not yet sniffed out his hiding place, and if Velen had anything to say about it, they never would. Here, the best Draenei minds would continue to devise ways to harness energies and direct them to keep them safe. The handful who had survived here, they would regroup and recover, heal and wait and pray. They had at last tricked Kil'jaeden the Deceiver and escaped his terrible gaze. The orcs had captured 3 of the stones, but Velen still had 4. Fortune's Smile, Eye of the Storm, Shield of the Naru, and of course Spirit's Song. And although his link with the Naru was tenuous, Kior yet lived. Even as tears spilled down his white face to drop on the surface of the violet crystal, even as he grieved the utterly tragic loss of so many lives, Velen, prophet of the Draenei, felt hope stirring inside of him. Chapter 21. We had lost everything at this point. We had abandoned balance and harmony in our world, and thus the elements had abandoned us. Demons guarded the entrance of Ashigan, cutting us off from the ancestors. Our physical bodies and our very souls had become corrupted from the blood that, in their eagerness for power and strength, most of the orcs had gladly imbibed. And then, when we had done all this ourselves under the guidance of Gul'dan, Kil'jaeden abandoned us. Thus came what has been called the Dying Times. May its like never visit us again. What do I do? Gul'dan could not believe the words were coming from his own lips, but he was so terrified that any advice seemed better than this sick fear he lived with. And Azul regarded him with contempt. You made this choice. It is not as if you are blameless yourself, Gul'dan snapped. Of course not. I made choices for myself, for my own advancement, but I never threw away the future of my people, my world, for it. Where is the power you were promised now, Gul'dan? Where the power that you bartered our people for? Gul'dan turned away, trembling. There was no power, and Azul knew it, which is why his words were spit so deep. Far from rewarding his loyal service with glories and godhood, Kil'jaeden had simply vanished. All that was left of his presence in this world were the warlocks and their demons, a maddening horde in a ravaged land. No, he thought. No, that was not all that was left. There was still the Shadow Council. There was still Black Hand, the ideal puppet, precisely because he did not realize he was one such. And while the Horde was now infused with the blood of demons and craved violence and destruction more than meat and drink, they had not gotten out of control. At least, not yet. He would summon the council to meet in their beautiful black temple. Doubtless they, too, would be searching for ways to salvage what power was left. Yes, there was still the Shadow Council. The land is dead, Durotan said quietly as he stood with his old friend, surveying what had once been verdant meadows and foothills. Durotan scuffed at the dirt with his boot. Powdery sand and rock were revealed as he kicked away the dead yellow grass. Wind, no longer blocked by trees, whistled past them. Orgrim said nothing for a long time. His eyes told him Durotan was right. He looked to the riverbed where he and Durotan had swum in one of the many challenges and saw no hint of water that had ever flowed in it. What water remained in the land was filthy, clogged with animal corpses and sediment. To drink it was to risk illness. Not to drink it was to die. No water, no grasses. Here and there were places that still managed to survive, such as the Tricador forest. Ancestors knew how. The orcs were growing thin, for no grasses meant no herd animals. The last 3 years had seen more orcish death from starvation and disease than from the battles against the Draenei.
More than the land is dying,
Orgrim said at last. His voice was thick and heavy. He turned to face Duratan.
How's the frost with grain supply?
To his eyes, he and Duratan looked green. Next to others such as Grummash and Blackhand, they were still more brown than green, but the damage was being done. Duratan had theorized that it was the warlock powers that were doing this to them and their worlds. Certainly those who had directly drunk whatever potion Gul'dan had concocted for them were more vivid hue than others. Strange, Orgrim thought. There was irony that while the land turned brown when it should be green, the orcs turned green when they should be brown. Duratan grimaced.
Several barrels were stolen in the attacks. Which clans? Shattered Hand.
Orgrim nodded. Frostwolf clan was bearing the brunt of the recent fury of attacks after the Horde had taken Shathrath. Sightings of the Draenei had dwindled, and it had been a full 6 months since anyone had reported even glimpsing one of the elusive blue-skinned beings, let alone killing one. Duratan had made the Frostwood clan a clear target when he refused to drink from the chalice that night. Shathrath fell, and even before then his reluctance to attack the Draenei had not gone unnoticed. Now that the Draenei, the only focus the orcs had as an outlet for the visible increased bloodlust, were becoming scarce, many felt that somehow Duratan was responsible. Never mind that it was quite likely that the Draenei had simply been hunted to extinction, that the initial goal of wiping them off the face of the earth had actually been achieved.
I'll ring some next time I see you,
Orgrim said.
I will not take charity. If my clan were in your position, you would beat me nearly senseless and shove the food down my throat rather than let me refuse it,
Orgrim said. Duratan laughed and seemed surprised that he did. So Orgrim let himself grin. For a moment, if he could ignore the dead land around them, the unnatural hue of their skin, it was as if the horrors of the intervening years had not happened. Then Duratan's laughter faded, and the preset returned.
For the sake of the children, I will accept it.
He turned his head again, looking out over the wasteland. New names were cropping up, harsher names, darker names. The Citadel was becoming known as the Hellfire Citadel, the entire area of the Hellfire Peninsula.
The destruction of the Draenei will lead to that of the orcs as well if something is not done,
Duratan said.
We are turning against each other, stooping to stealing food from the mouths of children because the land is so wounded it can no longer nourish us. The demons, capering at the heels of warlocks, can destroy and torment, but they cannot heal or feed the starving.
Orgrim asked in a low voice.
Has anyone tried working with the elements?
Such activities were still forbidden, but Orgrim knew that desperation was causing some to rethink the old ways. Duratan nodded.
It was a failure. We have been met with stony silence. Demons guard Oshagon. We can find no hope there. Then we are finished,
Orgrim said quietly. He glanced down at his hammer. His shaft leaned against his legs as they stood. He wondered if the prophecy of the Doomhammer was being fulfilled even now. He was the last of his line. He had already brought salvation and then doom by using this weapon to drive the Draenei to extinction, and how could it possibly be used now to bring justice? When all was dying, How could everything change again? The will to survive was powerful, Gul'dan thought as he readied himself for sleep. He had taken to sleeping in the Black Temple in a room he had redesigned specifically for him. In it, he placed a ritualized fashion. In it, he placed in a ritualized fashion all the trinkets and tools he needed to properly command the demons he summoned. Shards from the Draenei souls, certain stones for larger creatures, potions to help him keep his energies up when he flagged. There were skulls too, and bones, and other signs of dominance. Certain herbs were burned in containers, their pungent or sweet aroma inducing visions. It was to a jar of such that he turned now. He had lit a small fire in a cauldron and permitted the wood to burn down to glowing embers. Chanting softly, Gul'dan tossed the dry leaves on the fire and forced himself not to cough as the scent filled the air. He went to his bed. He liked to think that perhaps this was the same bed upon which the loathed Velen slept when he was in the temple, and quickly fell to sleep. Gul'dan dreamed, as he had not done since Kil'jaeden's departure, and even when the strange, dark place that was the vision, he had knew it to be true. The vision was that of a vaguely orc-shaped being, clad in a long cloak that obscured his face. He was slender, even more slender than an orc female, but somehow Gul'dan immediately sensed that it was male. Daintily built as he seemed to Gul'dan's eyes, the sense of power that radiated from the stranger all but buffeted Gul'dan. A shiver shook him. When the stranger spoke in his mind, the voice was masculine, oddly pleasant, and profoundly compelling. "You are feeling adrift and alone," said the stranger. Gul'dan nodded, cautiously and eager at the same time.
Gul'dan promised you power, strength, godhood, things that your world has never even seen,
continued the smooth voice from a mouth that remained hidden in the shadow of the cloaked hood. The words caressed Gul'dan, lulled him, and frightened him at the same time, but he felt more angry than frightened as he spoke.
"He abandoned me,"
Gul'dan said.
"He caused us to ruin our world and then left us to die with it. If you come from him, then—"
Nay, soothed the stranger in that oddly compelling voice. "I come from one even greater." His eyes glittered deep within the shadow of the hooded cloak. "I come from his master." Gul'dan's skin prickled.
"His master?"
And he fell back as his mind was assaulted with images of Kil'jaeden and Velen and Archimonde, as they were long ago. He saw the transformation of the beings known as Eredar into monsters and demigods, and he sensed, though never saw, a great presence behind it all.
Sargeras.
He still could not see the stranger's face, but Gul'dan knew that he smiled.
"Yes, the one who rules over all. One we serve. You will soon understand, Gul'dan, that destruction and obliviation are beautiful and pure. That is the direction in which all things must go. You can resist it and be destroyed, or aid and be rewarded."
Cautiously, still worried about this cloaked figure and his honeyed words, Gul'dan asked,
"What is being asked of me?" "Your people are dying,"
the figure said bluntly.
"There is nothing left in this world for them to destroy. There is nothing left for them to survive on.
They must go elsewhere, where there is ample food and drink, and worthy prey to slaughter. The orcs hunger now for so much more than food. Give them the blood they crave. Gul'dan narrowed his eyes.
That sounds like a reward, not a task to which I am set, he said.
It is both. But that is not the only reward my master offers. You rule the Shadow Council, and you have tasted power. You are the greatest warlock that exists among your people, and you know how that fills you. Imagine if you were a god. Gul'dan trembled. Such has been promised before, but somehow he knew that the Sargeras was much better able to fulfill such extravagant vows. He thought of extending a hand and making the earth tremble, of clenching it hard and stopping a heart. He thought of the eyes of thousands trained upon him, their voices raw from shouting his name. He thought of tastes and sensations he could not yet even imagine, and his mouth watered. We have a mutual foe, the stranger continued. I would see them dead. You would see your people sated with slaughter and killing, and now Gul'dan could make out just the barest hints of features. A pale skin and a thin-lipped mouth framed by black hair that curved in a smile. It is a partnership that would benefit us both.
Indeed,
Gul'dan breathed. He realized that he was moving toward the stranger, as if drawn, then stopped and added,
but I cannot believe that this is all you ask of me.
The stranger sighed. Sargeras will give you all this and more. Only he lies imprisoned. He needs assistance to escape. His body is trapped in an ancient tomb lost beneath a roaring ocean of darkness. He hungers for his freedom, the power that once was his to express. As your orcs hunger for bloodshed, as you hunger for power. Bring your orcs to this verdant, unspoiled new world. Give them soft flesh into which their axes can bite. Defeat the denizens of this place. Strengthen your people, and with its vast green tide of warriors, join me in liberating our master. His gratitude. Again, the sly smile and glint of white teeth in the beard, and again that powerful buffet of power, mitigated only by the stranger's will. Well, it is likely beyond your imaginings, Gul'dan. Gul'dan considered. As he thought, the image of the stranger shifted and faded. Gul'dan grasped as he stood in a beautiful meadow. The wind tousled his braided hair. Beasts he had never seen before grazed their fill. Along the horizon, healthy trees towered. Strange beings similar to orcs but with pinkish skin as slender as the stranger tended fields and livestock. Perfect. The image shifted again. Suddenly he was underwater, swimming down. His lungs not burning for air despite the depths. Kelp swayed in the currents, obscuring but not entirely hiding trembled columns, and a slab that bore strange writing, eroded somewhat by time and the ceaseless gentle crests of water. A shudder passed through him as he realized that was where the Sargeras lay. Release him from this prison, and then. It seemed like a good partnership. Anything would be better than staying here in this world, which would mean a slow death. A beautiful, ripe land ready for plunder would all by itself make this bargain worthwhile, and while there was so much more to come. He gazed at the stranger rapidly.
Tell me what I do.
Gul'dan awoke sprawled on the floor. Beside him on the cold stone was a parchment covered with instructions written in his own hand. He scanned it quickly. Portal. Azeroth. Humans. Medivh. Gul'dan began to smile. Chapter 22.
Can a thing be at once a blessing and a curse? A salvation and a doom? For such I hold what happened next in the history of my people. From every account, the demonic energies used so freely and with no heed given as to their cost, leached all that was wholesome and life-giving from the world of Draenor. Kil'jaeden had wanted to increase the number of orcs so that we would become a formidable army, and he had done so, forcing the growth of our younglings and robbing them of their childhood. Now the orc population was larger than it had ever been, and there was no way to feed the hungry. It is clear to me, as it must have been clear to those living through those terrible times, that if we had remained on Draenor, our race would likely have died out. But how we left, and why we left. This world still bleeds from the wound of that. I do what I can to heal while still safeguarding the interests of this new horde I have made, but I wonder if those wounds will ever really close. Life from my people, a blessing. How we obtained it, a curse.
The Shadow Council had been nervous, almost as worried sick as Gul'dan had been at Kil'jaeden's departure. But now they had a direction. He called the council and shared with them the words of the mysterious stranger who called himself Medivh. He spoke of the fertile fields, clean water, healthy glossy coated prey animals, and he spoke even more glowingly of the beings called humans, who would fight enough to be a challenge, but who would inevitably fall to the superiority of the horde.
Food, water, killing, and power to those who agree to help us bring it about,
Gul'dan said, his voice seductive, almost purring. It gauged them correctly. Their eyes, some red and glowing, some still brown and intense, were focused on him, and he saw hope and greed on their faces. The work begun. Firstly, they had to redirect the attention of the starving horde. Gul'dan was well aware that with decreasing food supplies and burning thirst for violence that no longer had an outlet, the orcs had started attacking one another. He and Blackhand had sent out decrees that all clans submitting their finest warriors for controlled one-on-one or small party fights in public displays. The winners would receive food from the losing clan and a supply of pure water, as well as honored and fame. Frantic for something, anything to ease the pain of their dual hunger for food and for blood, the orcs responded well to the suggestion, and Gul'dan was relieved. Medivh wanted an army to attack the humans. It would not do if all the orcs had slaughtered one another before the invasion. Durotan continued to give him trouble. The leader of the Frostal clan, likely embodied by the fact that Gul'dan did not cut him down the night of the attack on Shathra, had begun to speak out more publicly. He decried staged battles as demeaning. He called for a way to try and heal the land, stopping just short of directly blaming the warlocks for it. In other words, he danced as close to the line as was possible, and sometimes crossed it. And, as had always been the case, some were listening. While the Frostwolf clan were the only ones whose leader had not drunk the blood of Mineart, there were others orcs in lower positions who had also refused. The one who worried Gul'dan the most was Orgrim Doomhammer. That one could be trouble. Orgrim had never much liked Blackhand. One day he might do something about that dislike, but for the moment he did not side publicly with the Frostwolves, and indeed was one of the regular victors in the champion battles. The visions continued. Medivh had a very clear idea of what he wanted. A portal between the two worlds. One that could be created with the Shadow Council and its warlocks on one side, and Medivh and whatever magics he was controlling on his side. They could not work in secret. The portal would have to be large in order for the armies Medivh wanted to pass through. Besides, the Horde was feeling defeated. The excitement and challenge of the arena battles and constructing this portal with high ceremony would give them something to focus on. Medivh was pleased with the idea. In one vision, he assumed the form of a large black bird perching on Gul'dan's arm, claws digging into his flesh, and reddish black blood trickled across green skin. But the pain felt good. There's a small piece of paper rolled up around the bird's leg. In his vision, Gul'dan unrolled the paper and saw a design that took his breath away. When he awoke, he sketched it on a large parchment. He surveyed it, eyes bright with anticipation.
Beautiful.
He said.
I do not understand your displeasure.
Orgrim said one day as he and Duratan sat atop their mounts to survey the building of what Gul'dan called the portal. Everywhere Duratan looked, orcs were working. The males were bare to the waist, the females nearly so, and their green skins glistening with sweat underneath the sun that scorched the land. Some of them chanted rhythmic war cries as they worked. Others focused and silent. The road to this plateau, running in almost a straight line from what started to be known as the Hellfire Citadel, was already well paved so that construction equipment could be easily moved. The shapes of the four large platforms were based on Draenei design. The irony did not escape Duratan. The original design had been modified, crowned with the now familiar spikes and sharp edges that were starting to make orc architecture distinctive. But Duratan could remember walking up similar steps as a boy and walking up those steps again with the intent of killing all that he found atop them. Two obelisks pointed into the sky like sharp spears, and a statue of Gul'dan sat atop one another. But most foreboding of all was the fourth. Set a little way back from the other three, this was to be the framework for the actual portal that Gul'dan kept promising them would manifest. Two huge slabs of stone towered into the air, a third line across them to make the most primitive of gateways. Shapes were starting to appear out of the rocks, looming shapes with cowled figures on either side, some sort of serpent indulged at the top of it.
Is it not better than having them ride into your camp and slaughter your clansmen?
Orgrim continued. Duratan nodded.
Yes, in a way, he said. But we still do not know what this portal is to.
Orgrim gestured at the sheer landscape. The Hellfire Peninsula was one of the most damaged areas of the world, but far from the only one.
Does it matter? We know what this portal is from.
Duratan grunted with a hint of amusement.
I suppose you're right on that.
He felt Orgrim's grey eyes regarding him steadily.
Duratan, I refrained from asking you this, but why did you refuse your clan the draft Gul'dan offered?
Duratan looked at his friend, answering one question with another.
Why did you yourself not drink?
He countered.
There was something not right,
Orgrim said at last.
I did not like what I saw it doing to the others.
Duratan shrugged, hoping his friend would not press the point.
You have the same insight I did.
I wonder, said Orgrim, but he did not question further. Duratan saw no need to reveal what he knew. He had managed to protect his people from the horrors of what drinking demonic blood would do to them. He had asserted himself to Gul'dan, and thus far no repercussions had fallen. And Orgrim, ancestors be praised, had had the wisdom enough to realize that there was something amiss, and had also declined. For now, that was enough for Duratan, son of Garad, chieftain of the Frostwolf clan.
I fight today,
Orgrim said, changing the subject.
Will you come?
Hmm.
I know you do this not for glory, but for your clan, Durden said. You fight to win them food and water. But I will not show my faces at these displays. Orcs should not be fighting orcs, not even in ritualized combat.
Orgrim sighed.
You have not changed, Durotan. You were ever afraid of me defeating you?
There was a hint of mirth in his voice. Durden turned for the first time in many, many long months, grinned with genuine warmth. The day had come. All night, while a ring of warlocks stood guard, lest any curious onlookers witnessed the dark ritual, several stone masons had been hard at work carving the final seal into the portal's base. Once they had finished, wiping their sweaty brows and turning to smile at one another, they had been quickly slain. The blood of those who had created the seal would prime it, Gul'dan had been informed by Medivh. Gul'dan had no reason to doubt this new ally's wisdom, but the luckless masons would not be the last to die here. The dawn was a fiery one, crimson and orange, and the air was thick and stale. While the portal was being completed over the last several days, other tasks had been finished as well. The war machines that had so devastated Shathroth several months earlier were now again pressed into service. Repaired, oiled, and tested, armor that had been neglected was polished, swords were sharpened, dents hammered out of chest pieces and helms. The great Orcish army that had so decimated the Draenei was being reformed. Some clans had been requested to remain behind. Gul'dan had done his best to convince the chieftains of the Shattered Hand, Shadowmoon, Thunderlord, Bleeding Hollow, and Laughing Skull clans that they were needed here. Gormash and the Warsong had been particularly hard to convince to remain. For a moment, as the chieftain raged at him, Gul'dan wondered if he had done the right thing by letting Hellscream drink the demon blood. More than most, he seemed to have little control over his emotions, despite Gul'dan's flattery about how valuable Gormash was to him, and how he needed him here. It was Gormash's wildness and unpredictability that made Gul'dan want him to stay behind. He could not Gormash getting some mad idea into his head and defying orders. Medivh would not like that. He would not like that at all. Blackhand requested that the entire Horde gather at the Hellfire Citadel. Over the last few days, several who had returned to their ancestral lands, the Frostwolf clan among them, had trickled in and camped in the area. They had obeyed the order to arm themselves as if they were going to battle, although few of them understood exactly what was going on. They assembled, clan by clan. Each clan wore their traditional colors in the form of decorative sash or belt over their armor, and on its hot, windy day, their banners snapped proudly. Gul'dan and Ner'zhul watched the assembly. Gul'dan turned to his former mentor.
You and your clan will remain among those staying behind,
he said shortly. Ner'zhul nodded, almost meekly.
So I assumed,
he said. He did not say much these days, which was just as well with Gul'dan. He had half suspected that the older orc would try to wrest control from him after Kil'jaeden had abandoned them, but apparently Ner'zhul was too crushed to even do that. Gul'dan thought with contempt about the time not so long ago when he had idolized, even envied Ner'zhul. How foolish he had been then. He had grown and learned even from the bitterness of deception, although there were times when he thought he caught the faintest glimmer of something in Ner'zhul's eye. As now. He looked sharply at the other orc and decided it was just a trick of the light. He returned his attention to the assembling clans and smiled. Even though his designs went far beyond simple bloodletting, he could not help but be stirred at the sight. They were glorious. The scorching sun glinting on their armor, their banners waving in the wind, their green faces shining with anticipation, as if all was as Medivh promised. This could be the turning point to greatness. The drums began. Deep, primal, they shuddered along the earth, threw stone into the bones of the horde. Many of them threw back their heads and howled as they began to march, falling naturally into step with one another. A unified people. Gul'dan made no move to hurry. Once they were all assembled at the portal, he would be magically transported there by another warlock. He could enjoy watching the parade of his army march down the wide, paved road to the portal. Standing in front of the portal was a Draenei child. Where they had found it, Duratan had not so much as glimpsed a Draenei in months, nor had anyone else. They must have considered it good luck to have found any Draenei, let alone a youngling. They were at the front of the crowd, standing next to the Thunderlord clan and the Dragonmaw clan. The portal gate had been finished and looked both beautiful and terrifying. Two cloaked figures whose eyes glowed red, either from magic or clever technology, flanked the opening. A carved serpentine creature curled about the top, its maw gaping open, showing pointed carved teeth. Its extended, sharp, lizard-like claws had ridges along its long neck and body. Duratan had never seen anything like this, and briefly wondered how such an image had occurred to the Masons. A nightmare, possibly? He grimaced. All in all, it was a formidable construction. But he had only barely registered the skill that had gone into its creation. His eyes were transfixed on the young Draenei. He looked so terribly small next to the enormous arch, small and thin and bruised. He stared vacantly at the sea of orcs who were bellowing at him, so far beyond terror that he obviously felt nothing. What are they going to do with it? Draco wondered, out loud. He shook his head.
I fear the worst,
he said. She stared at him. I saw some killing of children in battle, she said. She stared at him. I saw some killing of children in battle, she said. The bloodlust was upon them. I could not condone it, but I could not see how it could happen. But surely, they will not make a ritual sacrifice out of a child?
I hope you're right,
said Durotan. But he could see no other reason for the small figure to be present. If such were the case, he could not stand by. He did not want to risk harm to his clan, so he prayed he was wrong. The warlocks were chanting something now, and to Durotan's amazement, Gul'dan appeared right before their eyes. The horde murmured, and Gul'dan smiled benevolently at them.
Today is a glorious day for the orcs, he cried. You have all seen the portal being built, admired the craftsmanship, and how it stands as a monument to the glory of the Horde. Now, I reveal to you the visions I've had.
He pointed at the gate.
Far, far away in a land called Azeroth, I have an ally. He offers us his land. It is green and lush and filled with pure water and fat creatures to hunt. Best of all, we will continue to exalt the glory of bloodshed, a race called humans. The enemy of our ally will try to stop us from taking their lands. We will destroy them. Their blood, dark, will flow freely upon our swords, and we will have destroyed the Draenei. Will now do so to the humans.
A cheer went up. Draka shook her head in disbelief. How can they still feel this way? Can they not see this new land will suffer as ours have if we continue on this path? Durotan nodded in his agreement.
But at the same time, there is no choice. We need food, water. We must go through this portal.
Draka sighed, seeing the logic, but not liking it.
Even now, our ally is working to open the portal on his side, and now we will begin.
He gestured to the Draenei captive.
Blood is pure, offering to those who give us thus powers. And the blood of this child is pure still. With the life fluid of our enemies, we will open the portal and step into glorious new worlds. A new page in the history of the Horde.
He approached the bound child, who looked up at him with empty eyes. Gul'dan raised a jeweled dagger. It glinted in the sunlight.
No!
The word was ripped from Durtan's lips. Everyone turned to stare at him. He surged forward. If this new venture was opened by the blood of an innocent child, no good can come of it. He did not make it 3 steps before he was tackled and went down hard on the sun-baked earth. The instant it happened, he heard Draka utter her war cry and the clang of metal on metal as she charged. Chaos erupted. He struggled to his feet and beheld the crippled form of the child. Blue blood spurted from the slashed throat.
Gul'dan, what have you done to us?
Durtan shrieked, but his protest was lost in the roar of the enraged mob of orcs. The Frostwolf had sprung into action in defense of their chieftain, and the shouts of battle were almost deafening. Durtan's breath was knocked out of his lungs as his attacker, he could not tell from which clan, resumed the fight. In defense, Durtan lifted his axe and swung. The other dodged, moving more swiftly than Durtan had expected, came up, and the tender cries abruptly changed as the earth rumbled beneath their feet in a deep, piercing sound shuddered along their bones. The fighting stopped, and as one, the orcs turned to gaze the portal. Moments before, he could look to the area outlined by the pillars and simply see more of the Hellfire Peninsula landscape. Now there was blackness and a swirl of stars, as if one were looking into the night sky gone mad. Even Durtan's eyes were riveted on the sight as he watched the blackness, shimmering and reinforced itself into a scene that both startled and puzzled him. Gul'dan have spoken of a beautiful land, rich with fat prey beasts, fertile fields, blue skies. Durtan was indeed looking at a place he had never seen before, but it was a far cry from the idyllic realm Gul'dan had described. It was as moist as Draenor now was arid. A thick haze floated above blackish water and swaying marshlands grasses. A buzzing, chirping sound filled the air. At least, thought Durtan, there was life in this strange place. Unhappy murmurs ran through the crowd. This is where Gul'dan wanted to send them? It was not much better than on first glance than their own land. But then again, Durtan realized water meant life. Orange though the sky was, not blue and dredged through the land was not. Not filled with flowers and meadows, it could support life. He turned to look at Gul'dan as the murmuring rose in volume. Gul'dan was also trying to cover his own shock. He waved his arms for silence.
Azeroth is a large world, as is our own, he cried. You know how different a land can be from place to place. I am certain it's the same here. This place does not look as inviting as I want.
His voice trailed off as he shook himself, visibly recovering.
But behold, this is in truth another land. It is real. You.
Gul'dan pointed at 24 fully armed orcs who stood beside the portal. They snapped to attention.
You have been chosen to be the first to investigate this new land. Go forth in the name of the Horde.
The orcs hesitated only an instant, then grimly ran into the portal. The scene vanished. Durtan's head whipped around to stare at Gul'dan. The warlock was doing his best to stay composed, but clearly he had been rattled.
They are our scouts, Gul'dan said. They will return with news of this world.
Before the gathered orcs could truly begin to grow worried, the image of the swamp reappeared, and the orcs hurried through. They were grinning from ear to ear. More than half of them carried the carcass of large animals. One was a reptile of some sort, scaly, long-tailed, with stubby legs and a huge jaw. The other was a four-legged furry thing with claws on all four of its feet, a long tail, small rounded ears, and spots on its yellow glossy coat. Both were obviously healthy specimens.
We have slain and eaten both types of these creatures,
The leader of the scouts said.
the flesh is wholesome, and the water there is pure. We do not need a beautiful land. We need one that will feed and sustain us. Azeroth will do so admirably, Gul'dan.
A murmur went through the crowd. By himself, Duratan felt his gaze drawn to the beasts the scouts had brought through, and his stomach growled. It had been 2 days since he had eaten. Gul'dan visibly relaxed. He looked over at Duratan, and his eyes narrowed. Duratan tested apprehension, sharp and bitter in his throat. He and his clan were needed. He knew that. He also knew that his defense of the child and the reaction it had provoked among the other clans, many of whom had come to the defense of Frostwolves, would not be forgotten. He had half suspected that Gul'dan would order his execution or banishment, but apparently Duratan and the Frostwolf had yet some use to Gul'dan and Blackhand. So be it. For now he would fight alongside his brethren. Tomorrow would have to take care of itself. Whatever betided, Duratan knew he would die with his honor intact. Gul'dan looked back over the crowd of expectant orcs and took a deep breath.
This is the moment of destiny, he said. On the other side, a new beginning awaits. A new enemy to slaughter. You can feel it, can you not? The bloodlust rising. Follow Blackhand and listen to his orders, and you will rule this new world, as is your right. It is your world on the other side of that portal. Take it!
The cries were deafening. The crowd surged forward. Even Duratan found himself caught up in the thrill of a new world, so lush and ripe and ready for the taking. Perhaps his worry was misplaced. Perhaps this would indeed be a new beginning. Duratan loved his clan, loved his people. He wanted to see them thrive, and he, like all orcs, even before this moment, reveled in the kill. Perhaps it would all be well. Axe in hand, hope flourishing in his heart, Duratan joined the race towards the portal, toward this place called Azeroth. He lifted his arms and raised the cry that was on the lips of every orc as they surged forward.
For the Horde!
Epilogue.
And so began our people's history in the world of Azeroth. We thundered out of the portal like death incarnate, a torment of blood-mad killers intent on slaughter. It is little wonder the humans hate us so, many of them even now. But perhaps this history I have chronicled will one day be read by human, elven, gnomish, and dwarven eyes. Perhaps they will understand a little better that we too knew suffering and victimization. My father's suspicion that he had and his clan were marked for exile proved correct. It was shortly after the Frostwood clan entered Azeroth that Gul'dan banished them. They were forced to make their homes in the harshest of the mountains of Alterac. The white wolves who still hunt in this place are descended from the Frostwolves who followed my clan through the portal, and whose loyalty could not be swayed by the words of one who bore a grudge. When I was born, my father realized he had to tell the other orcs all he knew about what had been done to them. He had approached his old friend, Orgrim Doomhammer, who believed him and would have him allied with him had not my father been treacherously slain. When I reached adulthood, I became Orgrim's friend, as had my father before, and it is I who have fulfilled the prophecy of the Doomhammer. In their honor, this land is named Durotar. This great city, Orgrimmar. It is my hope that, my chieftain,
A deep, rough voice belonging to Eitrig. Thrall stopped in mid-sentence, moving the pen so it did not drip on the parchment.
What is it?
He asked. The elderly orc was one of the most trusted advisors.
There is news. News from the Alliance. One of our information gatherers has learned something he insists you must know.
Thrall disliked the term spy, but he had spies nonetheless, as he was certain Jaina Proudmoore had her spies in his land. It was to be expected, and was often worthwhile. Seldom had one of his gatherers insisted on seeing him like this. Something important must be happening.
Show him in and leave us,
he said. Eitrig nodded, and a moment later a small, scrawny, nondescript human male was brought in. He looked exhausted, undernourished, and terrified. Thrall rose to his full imposing height without thinking, then realized he might intimidate the human.
Will you take food or drink? He asked,
keeping his voice gentle. Spy shook his head, then adamantly, water, if you please. In a voice that cracked. The war chief himself poured the goblet and handed it to the man, who gulped thirstfully, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. My thanks, war chief, the spy said, sounding a bit calmer.
Your news,
Thrall said. The man paled. Thrall sighed inwardly. He would never be so brutal or foolish as to kill the messenger for bringing bad news. Such behavior merely resulted in no one wanting to serve as messenger. He smiled in what he hoped was a reassuring fashion.
Do not fear. Your news, good or ill, is welcome if it aids me in protecting my people, he said.
The man looked slightly less distressed. He took in a breath. My lord, he said. He hesitated, then continued. The Draenei have come to Azeroth. Thrall was puzzled. He exchanged glances with Eitrig, who shrugged.
Some Draenei have been in Azeroth for years, he said. They are nicknamed the Lost Ones. We know about them. This is not news, my friend.
The man looked stricken. You don't understand, he said urgently. Not those pathetic creatures. Draenei. There was a ship from the skies. It crashed like an infernal stone 2 nights ago. Thrall inhaled swiftly. No one had missed seeing that strange object in the night sky, looking like a star crashing to Earth. So it had not been a star, nor even an infernal. It had been a vessel. The man was still talking. Proudmoore has agreed to aid them. There is one among them, pale, noble, his presence commanding, though he is not particularly strong. They call him Velen. Thrall stared. The Draenei, the prophet Velen, here. He sank slowly into his chair as the full significance struck him. The worst enemy the Orcs had ever known had come to Azeroth, had been welcomed into the Alliance. How could there possibly be peace between Horde and Alliance now?
Ancestors, save us.